This is your host, Bruce Hutchin, welcoming you to another informative episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. This is Whitetail Rendezvous Podcast, episode number 335. Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. On today's episode, we're going to visit with Dan Johnson. Dan's going to talk about a couple things. One, run and gun techniques. Two, the use of an observation stand. Three, the first time in a stand is the best time. And he's going to unpack the techniques that you need to do when you spot a buck 100 yards away, 200 yards away in the morning or in the evening, and what you need to do to close the deal on that specific buck. Stay tuned. It's going to be a good one. It's never too early to think about food plots. Whitetail Rendezvous has an ebook for you. Just simply text 33444 food plot to get your copy. Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. Folks, you're in for a treat today. We're going to join Dan Johnson. Now, Dan is the host of Nine Fingers Chronicles, and there's a story behind that. And Dan, I don't know if you're going to share the story or not, how you got that title, but let's get this thing started.
How you doing? First of all, thanks for having me on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome.
Nine Fingers Chronicles. Well, that's my podcast that I do. It's about deer hunting. I'm a huge bow hunter, and the premise of the Nine Fingers Chronicles podcast revolves around bow hunting gear and equipment, stories from average Joes, BS sessions, and some gear reviews and information on gear. But the title of the podcast is pretty self-explanatory. I only have 9 fingers. I had my right index finger removed when I was living down in Atlanta, Georgia, working in a factory. And it got chopped off. And yeah, so that's the short story of why I call everything the Nine Fingers Chronicles.
Well, that's a great story, and that's in the past, and so that's you. I mean,
that's right.
Nine Fingers Chronicle, you own it, you live it. And you mentioned something in the warm up. It said you're a gear junkie or gear tech, and I just said gearhead because a lot of guys that I know, my son-in-law races, and he is a gearhead. I mean, there's nothing he can't do in a race car. There's absolutely nothing, but he learned that a long, throughout his whole life. And so let's unpack that a little bit. Let's talk about what you see and hear in the industry today, from ATA and all your reading that you do, that my listeners should really be attuned to.
Well, I tell you, for me, the interest on gear comes because I am not savvy. So like if you said, hey, Dan, go set up your own bow, I probably would not have a clue on how to do that, right? I still take it to a bow shop to get it done, but I want to learn as much about the products as humanly possible. And that's where my interest comes in. And that's why I share a lot of that information on my podcast, because when it comes to information about specific products, I feel that in the hunting industry, a lot of it is coming from a marketing company who's getting paid, or some kind of quote unquote celebrity or entertainer who is getting paid to rep that product. And I like to get guys on the show who are passionate about gear. They use it and abuse it every year, and the average Joes are the guys who are coming on and doing the product reviews, and then I speak directly to the actual companies. So, for example, the first product that comes to mind is Lone Wolf tree stands, right? In my opinion, one of the best tree stands on the market for the way I hunt, which is a kind of a run and gun style. And so I get the owner of the company, and you get that information straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
That's great. And run and gun, I'm just smiling. Todd Hurt from Wicked Tree Gear. He was the first guest I had on the show that talked about his run and gun style. Let's talk about that right now, because I know a lot of guys are shying away from the same tree stand, the same sets, and the same wind direction, but now they're tweaking it up. So let's talk about tweaking up your sets.
Yeah, it's from the way I have taught myself to hunt, and learning from some other hunters out there who have been successful. I've learned that you have to be mobile, and what I mean by that is you sit in the same stand over and over and over again. I know this isn't possible for everybody, because there are people out there who hunt on very small parcels of land, let's say 10 acres, and there's not a lot of options. But for me, I'm blessed to have quite a few options, nothing that I own or lease, but all knock on door permission. And I want to be where the deer are at. And the way to get close to them is by being mobile and, tearing down and setting up and having this chess match with these animals to basically give yourself better opportunities at a shot.
So I'm thinking of a ridge. I'm sitting on my ridge, and there's crops on both sides. I mean, it's just a funnel. And so that one mature buck, that he never comes near me, because he knows I'm there. He's 4.5 years old. He knows I'm there. He might be 5.5, but let's stick with 4.5. He knows I'm there. And so you're sitting there, we're doing some filming, and you say, Bruce, we got to move. Take me from right there, right now. It's a morning sit. We see him just drifting, ghosting away about 150, 200 yards. And he knows we're there, and we know he's there. So what do we do?
Right. I guess a lot of it has to do with the time of year, right? Obviously, if it's in the rut, we might try to call at him. And if that doesn't work, okay, so this buck came through, or if it's maybe early season, and he's going from bed, or he's going from a food source, if we're talking about a morning hunt, from a food source back to his bedding area, and we see him come up this ridge one way or the other. So my very first instinct would be to get closer to where he was just at and try to find that trail. So I tear down, we walk over there, we set up, maybe cut a few shooting lanes if there's, if it's needed, get myself in a position where the tree is in front of me, or between me and where I think the deer is going to come by, so I can get away with maybe a little bit more movement, and then probably back out, because more than likely, this is based off my experience, he's not going to take that same route back to that food source the next day. Now, a lot of it depends on wind direction and how the terrain lays and all this stuff. But from a very high level approach, I'm going to move within a shooting distance of where I saw him, and hopefully catch him the next morning, come back from that food source to that bedding area.
What about the evening sit? So it's a morning. I get it. We're going to, as you say, run and gun, get set up, maybe some shooting lanes, maybe not, and then get the heck out of there. And we're not even going to touch that till the next morning. How about long distance scouting to see if we can see that ridge? Let's say we set up in another ridge half a mile away, even a mile away, and we see across the one side of it. I'm going to keep the wind in my face, so the field I'm thinking about in the ridge is downwind, and so we're facing west into the setting sun. So we set up that we do. So now what are we looking for?
Well, I think what you're trying to describe is an observation stand. And basically, I do this a lot on field edges, where I will set up a a stand knowing that there's a good chance I'm not going to have an encounter with my target buck. And I'm just waiting for him to pop out in an area, maybe on a field edge, or if I'm back in the timber a little bit, finding out what draw he's using to get into a food source, or finding a staging area that this buck is using before he heads to a food source, or even downwind of a bedding area. If he's going to be cruising, looking for maybe a little sign, maybe some scrapes, maybe some rubs that indicates that a buck is in that area. I rely a lot on trail camera information to make my hunting decisions, but I always start with an approach of, I'm back and observe. I'm observing. I get the information or the intel that I need, and then I go in aggressively after this deer to hopefully have an encounter with him that night. There's the old saying, first time in, best time in. And that's kind of how I play it.
Okay, I'm going back to the scenario. So in the morning, we saw him ghosting through 100, 200 yards away. We went and set up. And so we back out. We're in the observation stand, however that's set up. And we see him coming back from the bedding area, either to water or to food, and he's hanging up in the staging area or transition zone, as I spoke to. So what do I do now after I see him do those movements? What do I do to get on him the next evening? Because I've already got my morning stand set up. So how do I work that I want to be there the next evening if I miss him in the morning?
Right. So I wouldn't even be in that timber that night. I would probably go hunt somewhere else, and hopefully that buck hasn't picked up a doe. Okay, so if we're trying to get this buck going back to that same food source, I'm probably going to be sitting on another trail going into that food source that has, number one, a good access route, and number two, good wind direction that I can potentially cut the trail coming in. And then, so there's typically in the scenarios that I hunt, I won't be able to even check out that where that stands at. However, going into the morning hunt, I probably wouldn't pay too much attention to that evening hunt because I don't want to potentially bump this deer. So I'll back out altogether. I won't even observe that timber because I've seen him here the previous day. So the next morning I'm going in to that stand that we set up, and hopefully get him.
So listeners, I threw out a scenario, and Dan, is sharing exactly what he did. So the morning stand, we got that down. So we're going to back out. We're not even going to do an observation stand. We're not even going to sit in the pickup a mile away with our heavy glass, with our spotting scopes, just trying to see where he's moving. We're just backing out, and we're going to hunt that morning stand. That's our best shot. That's the ace in the hole. If the wind's right, we're going to sit that stand. Is that correct, Dan?
Yep, similar to this, and I'll use the buck that I killed this year as an example. All right, so I got trail camera information saying that this buck was in the area. All right, I got a field edge picture of him. I had a good idea where this buck was either staging or where he was bedding, and kind of the area he was using to come to this field edge at night. So the very first night, I go and do a run and gun setup. It's an evening hunt over top of this transition period, or this transition area, and then the field edge as well. So I can kind of see this entire area. Now, that night, I saw a couple deer in the distance coming, but it was too late. So that night, or that next morning, the wind shifted, and I wanted to stay out of that area because my wind was going to be blowing in a poor direction between the food source and the bedding area. However, that next night, a front came through, and I was back in that same stand that I hung because I had a good wind direction again. So I didn't give up on that place. I just backed out for a morning hunt because the wind direction was wrong. And then because I didn't know where this buck was going to be on that particular wind direction, because I didn't have enough intel, and I didn't want to hang a stand in the dark and potentially bump this buck. So I went and hunted somewhere else that morning. And then the next night I came back to the same stand, and that was the night I ended up harvesting that buck.
Listeners, I hope you're taking notes about how strategic Dan is thinking. And if you're going to be a 365 hunter, if you're going to go after mule deer, just listen to what Dan says and take notes, because the key thing is, to me, you always hunt the front. Now, do you hunt the front end of the front or the back end or during the front?
Well, I'm always, if we're talking about the rut, I'm in the stand no matter what. Okay, it doesn't matter what the weather is. If it's breeding season, you have to be in the tree stand, right? And probably like a lot of your listeners, I have a full-time job, so I'm not able to, if a cold front comes through the third week in October on a Wednesday, well, I'm not hunting it because I'm at work and I have to save my vacation for the rut, right? So, yeah, weather plays an important role in getting deer off their feet, maybe some deer movement. But when it comes to the rut, I'm in the tree stand anyway. And so a lot of my decision making is based off of trail camera information and or wind direction.
Thanks for that. And, I think in Bill Winke, all throughout the fall, I just stay, connected to those guys, and he has so much data on hunting the front, even though you don't have, you're saving the vacation for. I started around the 26th of October and end up, at the end of November, really. And, anytime a front comes through, you have to figure out the wind direction and then get out there. That's my thought.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, obviously that could definitely get some deer on their feet early if a front comes through and they're going to try to find that the food source that they feel the most comfortable with. For me, like I said, if I'm going to be hunting, I'm hunting already. So the weather really doesn't matter to me, unless I'm going to, like I said, take an extra vacation day on a Wednesday in the middle of the week that is, say, well, I got a deer on camera. He's coming to this particular scrape or this pinch point or this fence crossing after dark. However, there's a front coming through. Maybe this buck is going to come just an hour earlier because this because of this temperature drop, and I may make moves like that. But when I'm on my 2-week vacation for the rut, I don't really care about weather patterns too much. If let's say a cold front comes through the first week in November, I have my vacation. I might get into the tree stand just a little bit earlier that day, but not necessarily going to make huge decisions based off of what the temperature is, because I will already have some kind of game plan in action or have a buck patterned at that point to hopefully make that next move on that deer.
I've been asked in the past, Bruce, how much temperature change do I need to get the deer moving? Your answer to that?
My answer to that would, again, and I hate to throw all these curveballs, but it depends on what time of year, right? So for me, if it's the first 2 weeks in November, maybe the third week in November in where I hunt in Iowa, the deer are going to be on their feet cruising. They're going to be in some form of that rut, whether it's pre-rut, whether they're locked down with a doe, or whether they've just broken away from a doe and they're cruising looking for their next doe to breed. When it comes to weather, the deer in the rut, the deer are already going to be doing what deer do in the rut. Now, as far as a big temperature drop in the early season, let's say the first week of October or the second week of October, for me here in Iowa, the opener for archery is October 1st every year. So if I can get a deer patterned, maybe coming to a bean field or some like a pinch point that's leading to an acorn ridge or some clover, then I might try to pop in there, do a run and gun if I know there's going to be a cold front coming through on a Wednesday, right? I go in there, I'm looking for probably somewhere between, if you're looking for specifics, probably somewhere around a 15 to 20 degree temperature drop. That can really shake things up. However, I just don't feel that some of these big mature bucks really care too much, even if there's a big temperature drop in that early season before the does are ready to breed.
Let's talk about moon phases. Everybody, there's a lot of information. Let's just leave it at that about moon phases and how the rut gets triggered, and the running moon, and just it doesn't end. I mean, it really doesn't end. And from your point of view, how important is the moon phase?
I don't base any of my decision making on the moon phase. Not one bit of it, because I'm limited to the amount of time that I can spend in the timber. One being, I'm a family man. Two being I have a full-time job, and three, again, if I'm on my 2-week vacation, I'm hunting anyway. So the moon phase doesn't matter to me. Now, statistically, there's been studies that show that from a deer movement standpoint, the moon phase really doesn't increase or decrease deer movement per se. Now that's observed. That could be different based off of observed deer movement from what hunters see, but I do think that there, in some way, shape, or form, the moon has something to do with deer movement. But for me, I really don't. I don't follow the moon phase at all.
One more question about scientific information, if you will. Barometer changes.
Yeah. There's a lot of information out there about barometer changes, and a lot of it correlates to the a weather pattern as well. So you're hearing you got a big cold front coming through, right? The next day is typically going to be a high pressure day, and that barometer is going to be somewhere in the 30s, high 20s to low 30s. And I've heard guys say, as long as the barometer is moving up or down, that is a good. That's a good time to be out in the woods. Again, I don't base any of my decisions based off of the barometer. Scientifically, could it have something to do with it? Possibly. But again, for me, everything revolves around whether or not I have a deer patterned on trail camera, whether I have him on trail camera or I've seen him from the tree stand, and I make my moves based more off of that information than extrinsic data like moon phase and barometric pressure.
I'm sitting here and I'm actually smiling because to you, you've got 2 weeks vacation and you can steal an afternoon or a morning, here and there. But when you literally lock down on your pick, you're gonna pick those 10 days of work days. So you get a total of 14 days that you can hunt if you hunt every single day. How do you decide, okay, here's my block of window. This is when this is when I'm going to start my hunt, and this is where my hunt ends. How do you decide on that?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with historical data that I have gathered myself through just sitting in a tree stand, right? So a lot of it is going to be that November 1st or 3rd or 4th, somewhere in that area will be the start date. And then I'll go all the way up until the 15th, to 15th, 17th, just depending on when the calendar lies. I like to start my vacation on a Friday. That way I get 3 weekends to work with. And based off of, again, scientific data, I think they say somewhere around the 14th, and don't quote me on this because I'm not 100% sure. I haven't looked at that data in a long time, but I think somewhere around the 14th is peak breeding. So before or after that bell curve is a good time to be in the tree stand during the rut, because you're going to see, a lot of deer cruising for that available doe to breed.
Hey, how do people get in touch with you, Dan?
Yeah, I think the best way would be my Facebook page, the Nine Fingers Chronicles Facebook page. Send me a message, like the page, send me a message if you have any questions, or that's probably the best way, is the Facebook page.
Hey, thanks for that. And hey, I want to give a shout out to Whitetail Stalker. They're our social media partner. So, check them out on Facebook. And also, folks, these shows are recorded with real people in real places. Yes, Dan has his podcast. I mean, he's all teched out. He's got a great setup. And so the sound quality for this episode is going to be as good as I can make it, as good as we can make it. But that isn't always the case. And so, give me some space on that if you would. Hey, Dan, when we talk about, we talked about gear, we're talking about running, gunning on whitetails. When did you start running and gunning technique?
Oh, man, probably ever since I got a hold of a hang-on tree stand. I first started hunting with a bow when I was like 12 or 14 years old, didn't take it too seriously. And then about 2006, when I was done with college, that is when I was done with college. I took a job in Alabama, actually. I lost my finger. I came back to Iowa, and I got my first lone wolf tree stand with sticks, and I sat in a ladder stand a couple times. After that, I kept having an encounter with a couple big bucks, but they were all down the ridge. They were coming down the ridge from me. And so I got a hold of my first hang-on tree stand and sticks, and I dropped down there. I had an encounter with that buck, and I never was able to actually kill that deer, but I had an encounter with him, and that kind of sparked something in my head, and it was just like, man, you got to be mobile. And ever since then, that's how I've been living.
And thanks for that. And everybody has different techniques, but what I like to bring out in this show, Dan's successful doing what he's doing, hunting whitetails. And so mix it up. But think about it. We're in February, March. You probably hear the show late February. Think about your strategies and think about becoming a 365 whitetail hunter. It isn't just you pick up your bow in July, shoot some arrows. You got your tree stand that's been there for 10 years, and you got 4 of them to hunt different wind segments, and you got 1 food plot or 2 food plots. Change it up. And what I would say is, don't even, as soon as the season starts, don't sit your stand. Go and observe. Get a half mile away, get a quarter mile away, and see what changes has happened on your land. And you might be surprised what you'd find out. Your thoughts on that, Dan?
Yeah, I think, you bring up some good points there. I know that for me, everybody tells me, I've been hunting the stand for 10 years. I'm like, okay, that's the first problem. What have you done to improve your odds on encountering the deer? Have you, the deer that you really want to hunt? A, is that deer even on your property? B, have you moved that tree stand? Because I'll be honest, I hunt on a couple properties where I share that property with a hunter who he goes to the same exact tree stand that he's had up there for 20 years, and that's where he hunts. And he's been successful in those spots a couple times every year. And it was kind of eye-opening for me, because I go, hey, man, I thought I would share some trail camera pictures with him. And he's like, I've never seen that buck in my life. And I'd seen this buck several times, not only in trail camera, but from the tree stand as well. And this buck was flanking that tree stand on a lower part where he could cross through the property without this hunter ever seeing him, because this deer was educated on where this tree stand was and that this guy only sat in one tree stand. So being able to move and intercept them where they are, where they're at, is a very good tactic.
So, folks, especially I hunt a farm, Wisconsin. I have a rifle stand that I'm pretty lucky out of. And before the farm I'm hunting now, I had one stand. I never spent more than a morning, evening, and a morning on the open gun season and not shot my buck. Period.
Yep.
Because they had to come through there. There was no other place to go, and they had to come through there. But I only hunted it in 365 days. I hunted it morning, evening, and I would sit out. So I'm sitting it all day on Saturday, and then if I had to, Sunday morning. So that's it, and then I'm out of there, and nobody set my stand. I mean, not in archery, not in anything, because it wasn't a good archery stand. It was a killer, obviously, gun stand. But so I had 3 sits in a whole year in that stand, but guess what? It paid off.
Yeah. Yep. And again, a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about today is based off of archery. You obviously have to be close to kill them. And again, going back to that first time in, best time in motto, where you move in on them. And more than likely, I shouldn't say more than likely, through my experience, the first time into those spots relative to how much land you have to hunt is the best time in to have encounters with deer.
Let's talk about gear right now, and then just for a couple minutes. And I can't believe it. I'm looking at my counter. I'm going, no way. We're almost up to the soft stop, and that means we've had a good show. So just talk about your gear and tell people what you put on your back and when you're running and gunning.
Right. So, man, and it doesn't necessarily have to be this, but this is what I use, because there's tons of other options out there for a hang on. But in my opinion, one of the best products out there is a lone wolf. There's also the XOP, or Extreme Outdoor Products tree stand, which is similar to a lone wolf, and the lone wolf sticks. And that gets me. So the lone wolf tree stand and 4 sticks pretty much gets me anywhere I need to go. Crooked trees, whatnot. That's from a tree stand setup. And other than that, maybe a saw in your pack to cut a couple shooting lanes if you are doing a run and gun setup. And trail cameras. I mean, that's what I live and die by. And that information that those trail cameras tell me, I'm currently using Exodus trail cameras, and that information that these trail cameras give me is what helps me make my decisions on where I hunt. So trail cameras and a mobile tree stand setup are the 2 most important things for the way I hunt.
Dan, thanks for that. And, hopefully we can get a follow-up before season. And, the June time frame, because I want to dive into how you use your trail cameras for run and gun, but we don't have the time for that today. So why don't you take a minute and give some shout-outs? We just get some gear shout-outs. So anybody else, any other gear or people, that's you get the mic.
Yeah. Well, first off, thanks for having me on the show, man. I really appreciate it. Again, shout out to my podcast, Nine Fingers Chronicles podcast. Check it out. Also, I'm the co-host with Mark Kenyon on the Wired to Hunt podcast. We put one of those out every week. Another great place for, deer and bow hunting fanatics to get some information. And then the last thing, I guess, from a gear standpoint that I'd like to inform people of is if you're like really serious about trail cameras and gathering trail camera information, check out a company called deerlab.com, and I'll let you do the research from there.
Thanks for saying that, because very early on, and I think it's Jonathan, I can't remember his last name, but he was on the show from Deer Lab down in Florida. And, folks, here's a shout out for him, is that moon phase, time of day, weather conditions, precipitation, you name it, he can layer all that in on top of your photos. And he has proprietary information to do that. So you get a story with every single trail cam photo.
Yep. And then you can use that information to hopefully forecast deer movement for previous years and maybe get a jump on a buck if he's been gone for a month and then he comes back every year on October 17th, let's say. And then maybe based off that information, you can maybe be in the tree stand that next year on October 17th and have an encounter with him.
And folks, what Dan said right now is 365 hunter and planning and journaling. And so that buck, the only time I saw him on my farm was on October 17th. Other than that, he's a ghost. Think about that.
Yeah.
So on behalf of Whitetail Rendezvous listeners across North America, Dan Johnson, this has been a blast. I mean, I got sheet and a half full of notes, and that means, and plus the time's flown by. So, sir, thank you so much for being the guest on Whitetail Rendezvous. Break. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Just
I didn't know if you wanted me to say anything or not.
Yeah,
you're cool.
Yeah. Let's redo that. So, folks, that's a wrap. Let's take a nap. For Whitetail Rendezvous for this episode with Dan Johnson. Dan, thank you so much on behalf of everybody across North America that listens to Whitetail Rendezvous. Thank you for being a guest on the show.
Yeah, no worries, man. I appreciate the time and having me on the show. I always love to talk hunting, and good luck to you this upcoming season, and good luck to all your listeners as well.
On the next show, we're going to visit with Alex Comstock. Alex is from the Dakotas, and he's already started in the outdoor industry. How? He's writing articles. He's writing a blog. He's getting involved by submitting his articles to numerous outdoor publications. He's going to talk about career in the outdoors. He's going to talk about shed hunting, and he's going to talk about why he's passionate about bow hunting, plus a number of other things. Stay tuned. It's going to be fun.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn, and succeed.